My pleasure today to introduce you to Dr. Nathan Johnson. He wears very many hats, which are listed on the slide, but just mention, he's an associate professor at Arizona State University, where he directs LEAPS, which is the laboratory for energy and power solutions that provides technical and business solutions to facilitate the global transition to a resilient low-carbon economy. He's also the director of the ASU Starbucks Center right here in Seattle for the future of people and the planet to advance environmental and social impact goals for a thriving future that catalyzes and inspires humanity and community development. And then he's also the assistant director of the research for the Global Futures Lab to develop international collaborations and solutions that accelerate progress towards the sustainable development goals. So his work spans countries and continents, and today he'll be sharing some of that work aimed at accelerating energy access and our low carbon future. So welcome, Nate.
Excellent. And thank you, June, for the kind introduction. And then everyone for sharing some of your time with me today. One of the things I also appreciate seeing some of the folks in the audience, undergrads, and looking at the chapter or lineage of your career, where you might be headed next. That affords a little bit of an opportunity to share some of my own personal background towards the more foundational beginnings of that career, as June summarized currently where I'm at. So I was born and raised in Iowa. I made the simple decision to not just pursue engineering, but apply just to one school because that school was in-state, had reasonably priced tuition, and it seemed like the right thing to do. So I went to Iowa State University, became a cyclone. I know I wanted to work in the energy sector, focused on environmental benefits. And try to also connect some of the lineage and background I had in my teens and younger, doing humanitarian impact work, Meals on Wheels, disaster cleanup from tornadoes, and a variety of other stuff. So just try to think, can I create a career or profession by doing good for people on the planet? I found that after a couple of years working in biofuels, it was interesting. So I actually started in combustion, thermochemical reactions, mechanical engineering, and it was interesting, but I got real tired of working in the laboratory because it really had no human element to it. And so I transitioned that work in combustion to actually solid fuels and no longer liquid and gaseous fuels. So solid fuels used for cooking and heating by 2.7 billion people worldwide, principally firewood, charcoal, but then also agricultural waste and dung. I moved into that field and rapidly found out that there was a whole heck of a lot of work to do and a lot of people doing really poor work. And so I lived and worked internationally in, I want to say, about a dozen countries in my 20s. Spent time in Honduras, Belize, Mexico, South Africa, Mali, Vietnam, Philippines, China, and a few other countries, trying to help well-intentioned individuals that also had a good amount of financial reserves create new businesses that allowed us to utilize market mechanisms that facilitated poverty alleviation, economic development, and also, very importantly, the reduction of indoor air pollution, since I was working in cooking stoves, which, by the way, leads to about 6 million deaths annually as indoor air pollution from cooking fires. While I was in those professions and works, I worked with British Petroleum, now BP, and then Nestle, in fast-moving consumer goods as well. And then I transitioned from that into off-grid infrastructure. So people don't just want clean cooking solutions, they want clean lighting solutions, and then there's transportation, and then there's power for healthcare clinics and more. And so by the time I turned 30, or a little bit before then, it was off-grid power systems. And then it wasn't just homes, and it wasn't just clinics, it was communities. And then you start to think about distribution networks, and then how do you pay for service with meters? But there's very strained economic targets that you need to hit for cost metrics to allow people to buy into those programs. transitioned back to the States, finished my PhD, picked up some work in anthropology, economics, and sociology. And then I started to work almost exclusively in electric power. So I worked with a postdoc at a company that won an SBR grant, Homer Energy, to transition that IP and technology out of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And then 10 years ago, I started to work for Arizona State University. And I moved there because I wanted to continue that knowledge and that practice of coupling like what's the customer really need in that business mindset with the academic rigor of what the heck are we working on and how are we going to make sure it has impact and value. But do so in a way that wasn't just the research, it was also the education and the service. So I kind of naturally found myself back at ASU. And over that time, I started the LEAPS laboratory with a number of colleagues I'll mention here in a minute. And then a couple years ago, was asked by the president of our university to lead the ASU Starbucks Center. And so I'm coming to Seattle 3 or 4 times a year for that as well. Focused on decarbonization, reduction of water and waste in the food and beverage industry, as well as providing social impact. And then how do we create use-inspired research that has an enabling environment at a university so that it's more than just in interest, it's treated and acted with seriousness. It has a culture, it has metrics, it has process, it has professional programs. And that's where I was asked to be the assistant director of research because we've been doing that informally for about 3 years. And then the university wanted to double down and get a little bit more serious on creating the enabling environment as well. So that's kind of how the last few years have been. But how I got here today is yesterday I actually went for a run. So I'm in, moderately avid runner. Before having 3 kids, all still in diapers, I ran a little bit more. But yesterday, I haven't been to this section of the city before, so it was really wonderful to run around the lake there and be up at Gasworks Park and then Kite Hill, a person practicing. And I don't know if you've been to see the Fremont Troll before, but that's a heck of a lot of nice. That's really fun. Went down. I was really impressed to see the U.S. Naval Reserve Armory and that museum there. We do actually a lot of work with the Navy, so I wasn't aware that it was there. And then coming around and going up Volunteer Park, and if you see between miles 6 and about 6.5, it's pretty steep there. I don't know if anyone's ever taken the steps. Not the fastest pace I kept yesterday. But then going through the Asian Art Museum and then coming back down through campus, catching a little bit of the tail season, of course, of the cherry blossoms, then a picture in front of the W, and then you have Shell House and a few other things up there. So the reason that I wanted to share this is that my introductory remarks about who I am and what I did, and about the work you're going to see is a lot of it's about immersion. It's about immersion in society. It's about immersion where you are. It's about leveraging your place. It's about connecting with others. It's about learning. It's about communities, and it's about partnerships. And you're going to see that as I talk about the types of technical work we do. That's also what brought me to Arizona State, and I wanted to give just one slide overview of Arizona State University, and the charter is what brings a lot of us to that university. And in particular, as a public institution, I bolded a few words there. It succeeds by whom it includes and how they succeed, but not who is excluded. We're focused at creating public value, and then also focused on use-inspired research and what we call principled innovation. And it's not an artifact or societal value section that's one paragraph of a 15-page proposal. It's why we do the work. It sets the direction and it sets the bearing of everything we do. It's the largest U.S. university, a little over 140,000 students, 62,000 online students, and a significant portion of those are also Starbucks personnel or Starbucks partners, as you would say. About $700 million in research and development each year. My personal research team oversees about 5 million of that, and then the other programs that I lead is about another 10 to 15, depending on the year. We have a variety of international centers and partnerships, sustainability, but also as a large institution, it's also underscore that we're not just doing research. We also own and operate $6 billion in assets, including a significant amount of solar generation, CT, natural gas combustion turbine, and then a combined heat and power, which are going to be decommissioned in the next few years as we move away from gas-based heating and cooling and go to electric boilers and microdistricting to reduce the thermal losses in the electric loop, which is about 30%, so pretty significant. And you see some of our global reach in about 100 countries. Two of the initiatives that I wanted to highlight there are youth mappers in 50 countries, 300 chapters, and then Dream Builder, which was just purported again with a bit of funding and support by VP Harris. And it's about in 100 countries, and that's focused on gender equity and entrepreneurship, and about 3,000 people in energy, which is a focus today. So another thing that I was mentioning about my background and experience and how we look at the work we do in our team and how we project that out to our colleagues and professionals is that we spend a good amount of time focusing on the problem, and it's not only on the right-hand side. It needs to be it needs to have elements of the right and then largely also motivated on the left. Because if at the end of the day you want to get your work out to create public value, the public value is created by the public, not just the academics. And so we spend a lot of time understanding who the users are, what are the market segments, what might be the cost competitive analysis with other energy services they might provide. And as an engineer, we look at, or as a group principal in engineering, we do look at innovation in product, process, and people, but technology may not be the only part of the solution. It may not actually be the solution. It might be the easy solution, and it might be the most expensive solution, but delivery, service, warranty, training, and more might be really where you want to be spending your time. And that's what I learned and was able to fortunately bring with myself from the private sector. My team here is, as Jude kindly indicated, facilitating the global transition to a resilient low-carbon economy. We generally get engaged when the problem space is articulated by more than just a technical need. It often requires a re-architecting of value propositions and stakeholders. Usually there is some change in the business model, and also policy will come up a bit. I'm in our leadership team. Joining me are these 5 individuals, and I'll talk about the top 4 there: grid modernization, energy resilience, global energy access, and workforce development. And then testing and evaluation is our test bed, and then all of our pilot technology out in the field. A couple things to note about this is there's only 2 others with a PhD. All of them are staff. James, Elena, Sam, and Alexander were actually students in my team, and then they transitioned into these leadership roles. They each run teams of between 5 and 10 people. We operate as functional units, and so if you've thought about organizational design and theory at all, instead of a process-oriented organization where it's like science to applied research and then prototyping and more, we're functionally organized into these areas. We have projects that connect across, and each group contains anywhere between 1 and 3 PhD students. Joe Sanchez is a Marine Corps veteran, and then Alexander Mobley is an Air Force veteran. And we do a significant amount of work with the Office of Naval Research, U.S. Navy, and Office of Secretary of Defense generally. And about 50% of our employees are veterans. About 30% are women, and then about 25% right now are, just with some recent hires we made this morning, Native Black African, because we're working to increase access and equity to higher education in the United States. And it's easy for some people that are in the know, but for certain sections of the global populace, it's hard to even understand how to even begin an application. And so we have very targeted hires to individuals and sections which represent the stakeholders and the beneficiaries we work with, but also the type of team we want to build and the type of culture we want to have. Now, when I talk about these projects, I'm going to take one project in each one of these cohorts, is what we call them: grid modernization, energy resilience, and therefore. Each project has been taken from problem to discovery to application and then to translation. And so you'll see how we've been able to connect what does the user need with the user actually got something at the end of the day. You'll see a little bit of science, you'll see a lot of engineering, and you'll see some financial stuff and policy as well. But you won't walk away from today with just like a scientific type talk and aspect, because this gives you an understanding of the way we look at problems as well. And much like if you're a startup company and you give a pitch, the investors are going to ask you what your exit strategy is. Similarly, whenever we take on a new project, we need to, at the inception of that project, know the translation strategy. It's not an artifact we leave for someone else to do. We define it at the onset. And grid modernization, one project, and each cohort has between 5 and 7 active projects typically at any time. This project is distribution system state estimation. And so for the folks in the room that are aware of phasor measurement units and the real-time estimation of what's happening on transmission systems, installing those PMUs on a distribution network is cost prohibitive. So then, and usually, we haven't cared too much about the distribution infrastructure. Until now that we have electric vehicles and solar and storage, demand response, power quality disturbances, and more, we actually care now. And particularly as well with the onset of those technologies, the distribution network infrastructure is going to be, is less prepared than the stresses that are going to be put on the transmission infrastructure, including the effects of extreme heat and climate change that we experience many days of the year in Phoenix. So with some of the work funded by Office of Naval Research, NSF, Department of Energy, and then the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, ESTCP, and then with these funders, it was realizing that we often don't have enough fidelity to understand what's going on in a distribution network. And then with state estimation techniques, you can often get the voltage magnitude reasonably estimated, but your phase angle is just way off. And so if you can't accurately estimate what's going on, it's kind of hard to plan and predict in real time. So if that was the problem space, the discovery here is to resolve and create the science behind DSSE. This was led by one of my students, Shamo Saha, who's now at the Electric Power Research Institute, collaboratively advised by Anna Scaglione, is using graph signal processing framework. And we answered 2 to 3 main questions. One is how accurate can we get on the left, and that's with graph signal processing. And then on the right is distribution networks can be very large. You don't want to install the sensors everywhere. So how many sensors do we need and where do we put them? And so that was the second phase of this aspect of the work. Now when it came to the application of this, and I say application because it's engineering and more, but in this case it's almost exclusively engineering, is we did test cases, IEEE test cases, MAT power test cases, single phase on the first, and then 3-phase on the bottom, to compare. And these are very commonplace, published in the literature, known test cases that people throw around with their own algorithms to kind of vet, does it make sense and how good is it going to be? So we published this. We were able to find out we could get to very low error, very respectable accuracy, and then we could say, well, this is the end of the road. We publish a paper and then be largely done for the day. But there's 2 more phases again that we want to see is, well, the application, but then the translation. So this is the combination of legacy AMI meters, some low-cost meson meters that we're going to install, and those are a couple $100s a piece, with our DSSE algorithms, and we're going to install that at Marine Corps Air Station Yuma in the southern part of Arizona. A little over 100 buildings, housing units, 8 circuits, a fairly high number of transformers, low voltage, medium voltage, and over 50 miles of cable. And this is public data. You can actually Google this. You can see a building map of the military base. And then on the right there is indicating where we're going to install these meters. And so that's going to be our pilot application of this particular project, which was only enabled through partnerships, private sector partnerships and more. So we're going to install the meters to gain full visibility on everything that happens in real time. Data resolution is 25 milliseconds. We're going to run our algorithms to see how well are we recreating the system, because we know exactly what it looks like with 220 some meters out there. But then within our simulations and algorithms, we're going to be selectively removing some of the meters to see how few can we install up to a certain level of acceptable accuracy. And that's going to be the ground truth as we're transitioning this IP outside of the university with these partners. And so one project to share with you on energy resilience. This is, again, out of the Office of Secretary of Defense program, ESTCP. A few partners there. Zindi, they're a microgrid modeling firm. 350 Solutions is an environmental consulting firm. Climate Tech is a subsidiary of Bosch, which is a very large family-owned enterprise. Climate Tech does interior building automation. Verigy is our EPC firm for all the construction and install. ELM is the company that has the machine-to-machine controls for storage and solar and more. And then our utility, Salt River Project, and then the target client there was the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs, which is the National Guard of Arizona. So if you followed the National Defense Authorization Act, and I say that as an if, knowing there's probably no one in the audience who's actually reading that document, that's fine, I'll paraphrase it for you. So every year, Congress passes the National Defense Authorization Act, which lists here's our requirements or goals and where the money's going to go to meet those for the U.S. military. A few years ago, resilience became a necessity or requirement. It was unfunded and it was not defined. In the last couple of years, that's become defined. And what that means is 7 to 14 days of power in the event of a grid outage. So it's not, it can be solved by the utility and they just have, firmer generation or better ramp rates or whatever the heck that even means. No, it means that you have a solution. Either you've built it or you have a third party that is providing you with guaranteed electricity in the event that your substation goes down, in the event that the utility goes down. The other thing that I find interesting about this is that it limits taxpayer obligations to meet that mandate at 50%. So there is billions of dollars worth of infrastructure out there which has no way of getting funded. So then what we ask is, well, how do we do that technically? And then how do we do that from a business model? Noting that policy changes are unfolding, like FERC 2222, which allows small-scale energy producers and aggregators to participate in the real-time wholesale market. And it allows us to think of mechanisms where we can use a technology, not just to reduce costs, like having solar storage on your home, but then to also act as revenue centers. And it drastically changes the financial model that we look to work with. When we're looking at those two requirements of it needs to maintain power in an off-grid scenario, and we need to make sure that we're saving money, that's kind of the discovery where I separate for this one, island operation versus the financial aspect. I enjoyed some of the years where I was a little bit more of an avid statistician, and what I really loved about some of the studies and work and probabilities is what probabilistic modeling framework are we going to use for a certain application? Because principally engineering programs are taught like one semester of statistics or stats or stat or whatever the abbreviation is, and you learn often a couple techniques, but not the assumptions behind why those techniques are applied, or how or which situations those techniques should be applied in or should not be applied in. We come in with we make it easy for engineers taking stats. So in this particular circumstance, like you might think of like randomly simulating outages, or the clouds are covering up the sun, or whatever that it might end up being. We're using Markov chains and Markovian processes because what that allows us to do is describe future states in relation to current states. Where this afternoon, what I'm going to be doing is dependent on what I'm doing now. It's not fully random, of course. And so that's kind of what we're looking through, and we go at every step point in time, whether that's 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 1 day, or whatever those time steps be. I think this is the only part of the presentation where I'm going to threaten you with a little bit of matrix algebra. So we'll go through that a little bit quickly. Now, what we're going to do here is intend to model the survivability which essentially means, can you keep the lights on when the grid goes down? Now, if you've taken a look at anything in reliability theory and more, there's a couple characteristics that always keep coming up is availability. So once you turn on an asset, is it actually going to work or not? So is it in maintenance? When you turn it on, sometimes your car won't start. Same thing happens with generators. The other thing is a failure rate. Once it's on, what's the likelihood for it to stop working? And so often we talk about that as mean time between failure. And if you're in the power industry, mean time to failure, mean time between failure are fairly common terms that we would know and utilize. So if we take those principles and we utilize those in a microgrid framework, you can put in some fun combinatorics to understand what is the probability to get from your current state into a future operating state. And you start off by your initial system state, which is based upon is the asset available, and then the likelihood for you to move between states, which is based upon your failure rate. So for example, if I have 5 generators operating, there's a certain probability that I can maintain 5 generators operating, which is going to be a lower probability than if any 4 of those generators are operating. And so that's kind of how we think about it. We take those forward, I'll skip that for a second. And then this future state is based upon your current state and then a bunch of matrix algebra on the probability to transition between. And that gets us to our next state. This is the last little bit of matrix stuff here. So that future state, then we just say that ST is what is the likelihood or probability of that actually occurring and meeting your loads. And so this right here is, are you able to meet your loads? And then the top one is, are you unable to meet your loads? That's all that means. And so when we take that through, we create there on the left, which is essentially sum up over 168 hours. There's that many hours in a 7-day sequence, is what is your likelihood at every hour, your probability, I should say, to be able to meet the load. And we repeat that for the duration of the islanding event. And that's how we would calculate the islanded operation objective function. Now for grid connected, this is a bit simpler, and this is as far as we're going to get with it, is for folks out there that are the optimization practitioners, this is just a mixed integer linear program. We account for generator cost, battery cost, grid energy, market participation, which is only allowed now due to FERC 2222, and then the grid demand. And this is going to vary depending on what location we're at, how much solar is available, all that type of stuff, but then also what are the time of use rates, what's the rate structure of the utility, can you change that mechanism working with the Public Utilities Commission to afford some new options for revenue streams and more. And we get this in the lower right. And so with MPC, we're forecasting in the future what is going to happen out to 24 hours. We're then changing every hour as we step forward what is the expected future state, because we're getting better knowledge of what's going to be happening in the future as we walk forward. And then we utilize this to dispatch assets. And so you can kind of think of it as you have a list of objectives to do around town. You're not just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're going to take a look at them and say, you know what? I need to be at Pioneer Square for items 2, 5, and 7. I'm going to group those together. And so you're going to order them in a way that makes sense. That's all this is doing, but for microgrid dispatch. And when we see at the end of the day, we're able to remove a number of generators by hybridizing with solar and storage, improving that probability to meet load by a significant percentage, and also we're saving costs. And now this is the application, and this is what sells. And then if you can illustrate that, hey, we're going to keep your lights on and do so at a higher probability than just having a bunch of backup diesel generators at each building, and we're going to save you money, taxpayer dollars, and also, by the way, we're going to reduce the environmental footprint of the largest single user of energy on the planet, you get a lot of wins. And so when we take this forward in the translation space, this is testing our test bed in upper right, and then installing some load monitors. This is an active project, and we're going to install the rest of the equipment later on this year. We're coupling building automation systems on the right in the green with the microgrid assets on the left. And then we have a secure a local server that can then ping up to the cloud through a remote terminal, and then also connect up to the utility for price signals, because they're going to be installing their distributed energy resource management system. And so now the utility can integrate with us, send price signals and more. Which is, we did some of this work with Miramar, Marine Corps Station Miramar in California, because they were getting called on by the utility there to turn on all their generation assets when there were firestorms and the grid was really stressed. And so these large energy producers that would typically microgrid or just meet their own power requirements were asked to turn on their backup generators or take themselves off the grid to relieve overall stress. So now this allows us the connectivity with the utility and the price signals so that those end agents are able to get financial value for that type of credit. So in global energy access, this is where I spent most of my 20s and then a portion of my 30s with the LEAPS team, is realizing that a little under 10% of the population doesn't have access to electricity, so 770 million people. And also the right is a simple statement of it's expensive to be poor. And the US average electricity at this point in time, the graphic's a little bit old, 13 cents per kilowatt hour. But as you see, there's only 4 countries in all of sub-Saharan Africa that have cheaper power than the United States. Poverty is far more significant in sub-Saharan Africa, and you see some of the countries have 20-cent price of power, 30-cent price of power, 40 cents, and even up to 60 cents. So extremely expensive. And so if you're trying to drive an economy, or you're living off $5 to $10 a day, paying this much for electricity is just not feasible. So then what do you do? The discovery aspect about this, we also found out that there were limitations in applying expensive, like really good power engineering tools simply because they were expensive, and high dollar engineering consultants and project financiers to the work because the projects were just of smaller scale, hundreds of kilowatts and such at a time. So how do we create a faster but still accurate solution to assessing projects? Most of the assessments stopped by looking at geospatial imagery and saying, yeah, there's like 100 houses there. Therefore, you got like 10 kilowatts or maybe 100 kilowatts, whatever that ends up being. Some assessments do primary data collection, and they might design where the poles would go or where the wires would go, but they won't perform a power system analysis simply because it's too expensive. We took that as a challenge. So that was our problem space, and we designed this entire process from start to finish that would allow us to then provide that quality back out to stakeholders so that we would have funding to do the assessments, but then back that up by project financiers ready to build the projects that we assess. So this is our, again, that discovery phase and then getting into application, community engagement, collecting data, using AI to identify building structures, roadways, and more, creating the geospatial topology in ArcGIS, Esri, or QGIS, which is the free version of it, using OpenDSS for power engineering and analysis, and then running Zindi for the project financing and analytics. Getting down to something that now is feasible. So it's not just based upon development or grants or subsidies. This is actually financially feasible for investment grants and not development grants. And so if you're an investment grant, you might be looking for a project payback of 3 years would be great, but 5 to 10 is fine. Development financing, you might be looking at 15 to 20 years. And so now we're able to open up access to capital for projects by illustrating they can be done at lower costs and still be very, very effective. So that's on application, but then translation, we've applied this in it's like 130 communities globally, and we just picked up a contract with U.S. Trade and Development Agency, USTDA. It'll be public in a couple weeks, so I can't share the country with you in this forum. But then that's a $1.5 million project to do assessment of 75 sites in an island's communities. And then the United Nations Development Program is managing a fund of about $50 to $60 million to build those once we finished our assessment. And so again, from that, what's the problem, to how we apply science and engineering, to then creating something that works as a process, to testing that out through private sector partnerships, and then getting a point which is extremely important is how do we translate and scale. The last thing that I'll share with you is that the energy marketplace or career is moving so fast that we can't just focus on the 4 years that we have together in an undergraduate curriculum or the whatever number of years in a master's or PhD program. We also need to be training and working with working professionals. And we're seeing that generally as well, is that the knowledge that we were trained at in a collegiate or university setting or even a technical school is more rapidly outdated because the global pace of technology change, whether you're in energy, computers, advanced manufacturing, whatever the field is, it's more quickly outdated. And so as a result of that, we cannot just focus on the small time that we have together. We really do need to refocus on continuing education, professional development. And so we have an entire team that's just focused on that. And we train over 1,000 energy professionals a year, mostly in microgrids, mostly in advanced power systems, but then some also in cybersecurity. And so just in thinking about microgrids, that statistic was from, I think, 2021, but just over a 4-year period is the global capacity of that particular market was going to increase by a factor of 5. So, recent estimates are on the trajectory of $40 billion a year, like very soon. We have nowhere near the workforce to meet that type of demand signal. So we have people, doing what they can out there. And we're so understaffed as society and as the globe to meet that demand signal. We need to not just focus on the technologies that I was just going through in the business models, but then how are we going to train people to do the work? And this is across all of the ranges. And it's not just also, by the way, on getting people that know how to do distribution systems engineering or protection and controls for microgrids or system sizing and more. It's also, a lot of these professions don't even have the job requirements. There's no professional credential you can get out there for microgrids. And right now we're forming a consortium of entities, public, private, government, to actually structure what that's going to be. So in the discovery phase, we go through a fairly rigorous process with each different type of market segment. Developers domestically, developers internationally, transitioning military veterans, federal, non-federal, et cetera, all the way down to this process to rigorously create the training content. And another thing that we realized in this is that there was no standardized process by which we even think about the terminology or what the heck we're doing. And again, what I was saying before, when you saw that, on the off-grid assessments, that was a 7-step process, and some people only focus on a bit, a few focus on the larger amount, but no one really focuses on the whole of that. If your business model is, you're going to sell to what your business model is, and so as a result of that, those many groups only focusing on 2 of those 7 steps, they're only going to think about those 2 individual steps. So we expanded this in association with World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, USAID, a number of other public sector, NREL, Converge Strategies, Slipstream, and other groups to rigorously look at what does the microgrid design process need to be, and then how do we train for that. And so one of our active projects, this is the US military. So if you took so the white on the bottom is what are called government services personnel or GS personnel. Those are civilians contracted by the government. They're US government employees. All of the color green is Army, blue is Navy, slightly darker blue or gray is Marines, Air Force is red, and then yellow is Coast Guard, which is also in the Department of Homeland Security, not in the DoD. But then what credentials do they need for those job requirements? And then we're also helping those services write the job requirements that are even needed to meet the goals. Again, they were mandated to have microgrids, do microgrids, but didn't have the credentials, the people, or even the description of what they should do. Here's an application. One of my team, so James Nelson, and then he's right here, and then paralleled by Romney Kellogg. Romney's a PhD student in my team. Just evaluating training effectiveness. They've done 2 one-week trainings. I think I was mentioning this is in Mongolia. It was for utility professionals, regulators, and the energy ministry, focused on decarbonization and the utilization of tools to facilitate the analysis that goes into it. And so we're rigorously affecting their quality of learning on a variety of different metrics, and then translating that again, as I was indicating, to larger amounts. So how do we get to 1,000 or more a year? So engineering-based simulation, and that's really fun. That's actually, what's there on the left is a company by the name of INCSYS, Incremental Systems. They're out of Seattle. They've been here for about, I think, 25 years maybe. They do they do training on real-time simulators of transmission networks. And so we partnered with them on transmission network certification through DERC, but then also cybersecurity. And those are really fun sessions because we set up competitions where you have an attack and defense scenario. So how do you maintain operation of the WEC or of a synthetic network we generate for the state of Washington, for example, while you actively have someone trying to spoof the data in front of you, trying to open and close breakers, trying to shut down thermal generators. It's a whole heck of a lot of fun. Hands-on equipment in our test bed. We get up to 1,000 volts and 200 amps, and so it's serious power. We don't expose people even under the PPE here to anything at all. Because there's no reason to assume and have that risk, but we do train people on how to use PPE, and students only work with de-energized circuits. In terms of when there's like a safety consideration as such. And then we have, of course, standoff distances and more. We've done gamified safety and troubleshooting for K through 12, and then conceptual-based lessons. That was pretty entertaining, and also rewarding. I shouldn't say entertaining, rewarding. I was training utility professionals and executives in Uzbekistan and Turkestan on energy security and microgrids, and all the content is in Russian. I had a real-time translator, and that topic is, of course, important if you've been following any news about Eastern Europe. So this is extremely rewarding to be part of the. We have an energy workforce. Technology is training fast. Universities in their standard educational paradigm can't meet demand. So what are we going to do about it? So now we're on the road in the next year to scale and train 5,000 people a year just on microgrids and advanced power systems. And it's been great to meet with June and others to talk about the efforts that everyone's doing from the technical design and implementation of power systems, test beds, public-private partnerships, the great support that UW has from the state legislature and the governor's office for those efforts, looking at community engagement models for including end users in decisions, but then also in the application of options and technologies, and think through how can we as society, in whatever role we're in right now, create careers that enable more of the type of work to happen. So I hope you've appreciated an overview of some of the work we do and a little bit about Arizona State and me, and I'll take any questions.
Talk about education, and I was wondering if you also educate the people, like maybe at the military bases where you're putting these sensors in, or in these countries where you're going, if there's education at that level as well.
Excellent. The question was about education and workforce development for, maybe I could say, practitioners domestically and internationally. That's exclusively where the workforce development is. So we train installation energy managers. Depending on which branch you're in, there are slightly different terminology. It could be utilities engineer. NAVFAC Southwest, the Naval Facilities Engineering Southwest, has 40 high voltage technicians. And so within that section of the United States, it's with that category of individuals who will be most experienced for their job role to work with microgrids. Internationally, it's it's sometimes utilities, sometimes EPC firms, engineering, procurement, and construction. Sometimes it's citizens and communities. But usually that's just on the financial side and basics of operation, and not on any technician-related activities, because that gets to, one, an undoubted safety concern, and then two, it's just we usually have traveling technicians that we do.
Yeah, I think I meant more on, people who won't be doing the hands-on work, but people who might be using, like people like me, for instance, who I don't really know anything, but maybe it's interesting for me to learn about like what the grid like is made of, or like what the energy I'm using is coming from.
I love it. Maybe like beneficiaries or like interested parties. Yeah. So that's actually how we got started. Is I created a microgrid boot camp, or my team did, and it's a 1 week soup to nuts. You get a little bit of exposure in each one of them. We also have self-paced online things that are 30 minutes to about 2 hours long that you can do bite chunk. And that was really focused to give people exposure. So we might call that executive level education or like awareness building. Yep. Thanks for the question.
In your travels across so many different populations and countries, have you noticed different ways in which those populations interact with the grid, or does the demand curve and interaction look pretty similar?
I love the question that's focused on, given the locations that have been, do people engage with the grid differently? And the answer is quite yes. And Elena, one of my counterparts, has a great collaboration with June that's focused on energy access in Kampala, which is in Uganda. And whether you're an off-grid individual not connected to the grid, or an urban individual where the grid exists but you're not connected to it, there's affordances and opportunities to create informal markets around power access in an urban area. And so like how you think about energy, how you access it, how you pay for that, who do you go through, has a lot of different formats and flavors out there. As well as the concept of ownership generally is that, does a community or culture accept leasing? And so some cultures, ethnicities, religious law, or national law might restrict also like financing mechanisms for certain things. And so that therefore might disallow like leasing systems or other types of effects. And sometimes that's done due to fully avoid the potential for, like predacious lending practices. And so there's, some sections of the world where you just, leasing and loans in that way just don't exist. So that changes kind of the nature of the relationship. Yeah. I think the nuances are so much, it would require an enjoyable coffee with you to talk through more and share thoughts.
I'll follow up with one. In any one project, you have very many different funders and different kind of collaborators. How do you bring together such a large group of people to co-create just a solution to one problem?
Yeah, in thinking about these various projects and how do you bring a lot of folks together, that's where I lean in fairly heavily with my time, is on partnership building and network building. And it's partly motivated by, the sales pitch and understanding, even when I get into workforce development or microgrids, is that, some people say, well, are you a competitor to NREL, or are you a competitor to other groups? And I say, universally no, because if you took the summation of all of the people that could supply solutions, we're nowhere close to meeting the demand signal. And the only way that we're going to do that is by shared learning, partnerships, and networks where we help each other learn and benefit to maximize our own individual contribution. And then that really diffuses the room in a way that no one is more easily naturally looking at themselves as a competitor. Like a utility 5 years ago, one of the big taglines was microgrid, friend or foe. And now that's not really, we've re-architected the conversation. And then depending on the stakeholders, how we would create value propositions is going to be unique to any situation. But that's usually the foundational statement I make.
One last one on your workforce development. Is there any plans to grow that out such that if there are, say, students in other institutes or other places that want to get involved can and also can get trained and kind of build this, almost I would say, working towards building something big that is actually serving that purpose? Yeah.
Very good. So the question about scaling to other user groups or universities and more, we have some small amount which is free online education that's more from the awareness standpoint, and then things that get to into the pipeline to become a credential. That's a fee-based program, and so it's available to anyone, and then discounted to students and nonprofit partners at 50% the cost. And then it's just a fee-based service to recoup the costs for the continuous education, learning, and credit. We'd like to scale it out to more entities, and we're just now having the time with a few full-time trainers to meet the current the demand signal we have with certain large-scale off-takers to now think about how do we standardize the training more generally as a broader society and professional group.
There are no other questions. I'd like us to thank us